I never thought a quiet suburban morning could spiral into chaos. The sun had barely started, spilling its pale light across the cracked concrete of my driveway, and the gentle hum of sprinklers mixed with the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. My daughter Emily was sitting on the porch steps, her wheelchair parked at the side, carefully adjusting her blanket. She had this calm, unwavering presence about her that made the world feel lighter. But that day, something was off. I could sense it before I even opened my front door. A voice shattered the morning air, sharp and commanding, cutting through the usual suburban calm. "Move that truck right now." I froze, recognizing it immediately. HOA Karen. She had this way of projecting authority that made people flinch even when she had no real right. And there she was, standing on my lawn, clipboard in hand, bright red jacket glinting in the sunlight, glaring at my old sheriff's truck. Her stilettos dug into the grass as she stomped closer, eyes narrowed, veins visible at the sides of her temples. I stepped onto the porch, dust rising from my boots, my stomach twisting. I knew the HOA had been escalating their petty grievances lately. But this, ordering me to move my personal vehicle on my property as if I'd forgotten my own name, my daughter looked up, puzzled, unaware of the storm about to hit. I swallowed hard, trying to gauge Karen's mood. Her hands shook slightly around the edges of the clipboard, like she was straining to maintain control. "You heard me," she snapped, pointing at the truck. "This is an unauthorized vehicle. It's violating HOA regulations." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping, almost conspiratorial, as if she thought yelling would make the law bend. I didn't flinch. Years in law enforcement had taught me patience, observation, the art of letting people expose themselves without interference. But even I felt a flicker of anger at the sheer audacity. I took a slow breath, letting the early morning air fill my lungs. The faint creak of the gate swinging in the breeze sounded unnaturally loud, like a countdown clock. "Karen," I said evenly, forcing my voice to remain calm, "this truck has been parked here for months, you know that?" I let a pause linger, letting the words hang. My daughter glanced nervously at me. "Daddy?" she whispered. I shot her a quick, reassuring nod. She didn't need to understand yet. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. She looked around like she was inspecting the entire neighborhood for allies, but the streets were empty. No neighbors, no witnesses, just her, me, and the silent judgment of the suburban landscape. "Regulations are regulations," she insisted, tapping her clipboard. "I can issue a notice, I can fine you, I can," she faltered for a fraction of a second, and I caught it, a hint of hesitation. That tiny crack in her armor made my pulse quicken. I decided to test her, leaning slightly on the porch railing, my voice calm but heavy. "You do know who lives here, right? You do realize this is my home?" I let that hang. My words weren't a threat, but they were enough to make Karen blink, that carefully maintained composure faltering just slightly. She straightened abruptly, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I just enforce the rules," she stammered, waving the clipboard like a shield. Then came the real twist, the moment I'd been dreading. She noticed Emily's wheelchair. Her eyes widened fractionally, that sharp gaze softening ever so slightly, and in that instant I saw the problem escalate. She had no idea how to handle someone like Emily. That wasn't weakness, it was unfamiliarity, discomfort with reality. And Karen, in her rigid obsession with authority, didn't pause to think before she reacted. "That thing has to be moved too," she said, pointing at the wheelchair as if it were just another violation. I froze. My daughter's wide eyes reflected confusion, hurt, and fear. A slow, deliberate silence fell. The only sounds were the distant rustle of leaves, the faint creak of the gate, and the soft shuffle of Emily adjusting herself. The tension between us thickened. Karen's hand hovered over the clipboard, a finger tapping in rapid, anxious beats. I can issue a citation," she muttered, almost to herself. Her voice was shaking now, revealing the cracks in her self-imposed authority. I stepped off the porch, dust puffing around my boots, standing between Karen and Emily. My gaze was calm, controlled, but firm. "Let me make this simple," I said quietly. "No citations today. You leave my property and we all walk away, or you escalate it and we see how that plays out." My words weren't just words, they carried a weight she couldn't measure, a presence shaped by years of law enforcement, of seeing people test boundaries and pay consequences. Karen hesitated, blinking, trying to regain the upper hand, but the pause had gone on too long. And in that stretch of silence, I realized the subtle moral of the morning. Sometimes authority doesn't come from rules or regulations. Sometimes it comes from quiet confidence, from knowing the stakes, and from protecting those who can't fight for themselves. The moment stretched, seconds turning into an eternity. Karen's face hardened, lips pressing into that stubborn line she always wore, and finally, with a frustrated huff, she stomped back toward her car. The clipboard rattled in her hand, echoing across the empty street. I could hear the engine start, the tires crunching over gravel. And then she was gone, leaving only the soft breeze and the distant hum of a sprinkler to fill the silence. I turned back to Emily, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "Everything's okay," I said, even though my heart was still racing. She smiled faintly, trusting me without question. And I realized in that quiet suburban morning that the fight wasn't over. It had only just begun, but at least for now, we had survived the first storm. I thought Karen driving off was the end of it. I was wrong. That day, the tension didn't just linger, it grew like a shadow stretching across my property, touching everything. By mid-morning, the neighborhood had started to stir. Mail carriers, joggers, the occasional dog walker, all unaware of the silent storm that had erupted just minutes ago. Emily was still on the porch, the blanket tucked around her legs, her hands fiddling with the edges of her sweater as if trying to calm herself. I could feel her worry before she even spoke. "Daddy, is she coming back?" I crouched beside her, voice low, steady. "She's gone for now, but we have to be ready just in case." Emily's eyes widened, the uncertainty hitting her like a wave. I knew I had to calm her, but I also had to stay alert. Karen wasn't the type to walk away quietly, not when she felt she had power, even if it was only the illusion of it. The day stretched on. Calls came in from neighbors about the usual HOA minutiae, fences, paint colors, minor infractions. But underneath it all, I felt the tension like static electricity in the air. I tried to focus on Emily, on routine, on the mundane tasks that were supposed to feel safe. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was planning her next move. It was just after lunch when the first sign appeared. A knock on the door, sharp, insistent. My heart skipped a beat. I moved toward the door slowly, boots making a soft scrape against the wooden floor. Peeking through the peephole, I saw Karen, clipboard clutched like armor, sunglasses shielding her eyes, posture rigid. She was standing too close to the sidewalk, like she wanted to make a show of authority for anyone walking by. I opened the door just a crack. "Karen." My voice was calm, but carried a weight that only someone used to holding authority could project. "What brings you back?" I need to inspect the property again," she said quickly, almost stumbling over her words. There was a nervous energy in her, a kind of unsteady confidence that I recognized from years of seeing people try to control situations they couldn't. She glanced toward Emily, almost flinching. "Just routine, of course," she added, like saying it out loud would make it true. I stepped fully into the doorway, dust from my boots trailing faintly on the floorboards. "Routine inspections are done during business hours with proper notice. You didn't give any notice, you're trespassing." My voice was firm, measured, controlled. I let the words linger in the air like a warning, like a challenge. Karen's lips pressed tight together, her cheeks flushed. I could see the fight between her desire to assert power and the reality that she had no authority here. She was jittery, like a predator realizing the prey is not what it seems. I just need to make sure the truck, everything is compliant," she stammered, waving her clipboard. I leaned against the doorframe, silent, letting the tension grow. Emily had rolled quietly to my side, watching me, her trust absolute. "Daddy, she's angry," she said softly. Her voice was calm but weighted with concern. I swallowed hard. That moment, seeing her innocence juxtaposed against Karen's aggression, made my chest tighten. I realized how much I had underestimated the emotional toll this would take. Karen took a step forward. "You can't just ignore the rules," she said, voice rising slightly, trying to reclaim her composure. "I have the authority." I cut her off, voice steady, low, dangerous in its calmness. "You have no authority here, not today, not without notice. And you sure as hell don't have it over my daughter." Her eyes flicked to Emily, and for a split second I saw hesitation, confusion, fear even. And in that pause I noticed the subtle change in her posture. She was no longer moving forward confidently, she was retreating into reflex. This was where experience counted, the quiet knowledge that authority is more than shouting or waving a clipboard. Authority is presence, is the understanding of consequences. Karen began, then stopped, her jaw tightening. She looked around like seeking an escape route, but she was trapped by her own pride. "Fine," she spat, her voice low, almost muttering to herself. I'll be back, this isn't over." The soft click of her car door echoed down the street. I watched her drive away again, tires crunching against gravel, leaving only the hum of the sprinkler and the faint chirping of distant birds. Emily's shoulders slumped slightly, relief washing over her. I reached for her hand, gripping it gently but firmly. "It's okay," I whispered. "For now, it's okay." But I knew better. That afternoon, I sat on the porch, watching the neighborhood, trying to anticipate her next move. Every small sound, the rustle of leaves, the distant engine of a passing car made me tense. And as I sipped my coffee, I reflected on a truth I'd learned long ago in law enforcement. Sometimes the smallest battles reveal the biggest stakes. By evening, Karen's presence had left a ghost over the property. The mailbox seemed suddenly more exposed, the fence lines sharper, every shadow a potential threat. Emily had gone inside, tired from the tension, but I stayed out, boots planted firmly on the wooden porch, eyes scanning the street. Sometimes strength isn't loud, sometimes it's silent. Watching, waiting, knowing that the world doesn't always reward bravado but patience and awareness. The first part of the storm was over, but the feeling in my chest told me it wasn't the last. Karen had made a mistake. She had underestimated me, my patience, and my resolve. And in doing so, she had unknowingly stepped into a game she couldn't fully comprehend, a game of presence, of authority, of silent consequences. As dusk fell, painting the sky in muted oranges and purples, I realized something profound. Conflict wasn't just about rules or HOA regulations. Conflict was about protection, about trust, about knowing when to stand firm and when to wait. And as I looked at Emily, curled up by the window, I understood that the next move wouldn't be mine alone. It would be a test of character, resolve, and courage, lessons that couldn't be measured by a clipboard or a citation. The street was quiet now, the last light fading, but the tension lingered. I knew Karen would return, and when she did, everything would change. I woke the next morning to a quiet that felt almost wrong, the kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes you question what's coming next. Emily was already up, quietly rolling her chair to the kitchen, humming a tune she'd made up herself to calm the nerves she never voiced. I poured coffee into 2 mugs, letting the rich aroma fill the kitchen, grounding me before the storm I knew was inevitable. The mail carrier dropped letters into the mailbox, the sound echoing across the lawn. Most days it was a mundane backdrop. Today it felt like a countdown, and then faintly from the street I heard it, the soft crunch of tires over gravel. My stomach sank. I didn't need to look. Karen had returned. I stepped outside before she reached the porch, hands in my pockets, boots scuffing softly against the wooden boards. She stopped at the edge of the driveway, clipboard held defensively in front of her chest. Her face was a mask of determination, but the slight quiver in her jaw betrayed her. She was nervous, more than she let on, more than she probably realized herself. "You again," I said evenly. I didn't need to hide the weariness in my tone. "Is this visit for inspection or for theatrics?" Karen's eyes flicked to Emily, who had stopped humming and now sat quietly watching us from the porch. Her gaze darted back to me. I just need to ensure everything is compliant," she said, teeth pressed together. She tried to sound official, but the slight tremor in her voice ruined the effect. I sighed, the sound barely audible. "Karen, let's make this simple. No citations, no fines, no intimidation. You leave now and we go back to normal. One more infraction, one more attempted overstepping, and I'll have to escalate officially." My words were careful, measured, but loaded with authority. I let a long pause hang in the air, letting her digest it, letting her realize that I was not just another neighbor. She straightened, biting the inside of her cheek. Her voice faltered. She wanted to assert power, but there was a hesitation now, a crack in the armor she'd always relied upon. "I have rules to enforce." "And I have a home to protect," I said, my gaze unwavering. "Emily's home, and she's not just anyone, she's my daughter, and nothing you do changes that." There was a silence that stretched so long it almost became unbearable. The wind stirred the leaves, the gate creaked in the faint breeze, and Emily's small hands rested on her lap, gripping her blanket. Karen's lips pressed into a tight line, jaw working. She was frustrated, angry, and uncertain, exactly where she shouldn't have been. Then suddenly she shifted tactics. Her voice became sharper, more controlled. "If you're not going to comply, then I have to report this. I can't let." I interrupted her calmly but with firm weight. "Report what? That I'm a parent protecting my child? That I'm standing on my property? You're barking up the wrong tree, Karen. And the truth is, you've underestimated what's possible here." Her hand hovered over the clipboard, tapping in a nervous rhythm. She was searching for control, but the pause between her breaths betrayed panic. Her body language said everything she wouldn't dare voice. She didn't know how to deal with someone unafraid, and in that moment I realized the subtle but important truth: fear isn't always obvious. Sometimes it hides behind rules, regulations, authority. And sometimes the smallest display of courage is enough to unravel someone like Karen. Emily's voice broke the tension, soft but deliberate. "Daddy, she's still here." She looked up at me, her eyes wide, searching for reassurance. I crouched down to her level, letting my hand brush hers. "We're okay, Emily. Remember what we practiced? Stay calm, stay aware, and trust me." Karen's gaze flicked between us, uncertainty creeping into her posture. It was like watching a chess player realize they've miscalculated several moves ahead. And yet she couldn't leave. Her pride, her obsession with being right, kept her rooted. I'll be back," she finally muttered, almost to herself. "This isn't over." Then, in a motion that was almost imperceptible, she turned and walked toward her car. Her heels clicked on the driveway with a rhythm that sounded almost like a countdown. As she drove away, the tension lifted slightly, though the air remained charged. Emily exhaled slowly, her small frame relaxing fractionally. I placed a hand on her shoulder, feeling the warmth of her trust and resilience. "We did fine today," I said quietly. "She's testing us and we're passing." But the day wasn't done. That evening, while I was checking the perimeter of the property, I noticed something subtle. The gate latch had been moved slightly, not broken, not forced, but shifted in a way that suggested someone had been there, Karen or someone acting on her orders. My pulse quickened, boots crunching softly over the gravel as I investigated. Every leaf, every shadow, every faint rustle of movement felt amplified. I realized then that the conflict was no longer just verbal. It had become a psychological battle. Every glance from a neighbor, every sound of a car driving down the street now carried potential meaning. Emily's safety, her comfort, and my own sense of control were all entangled in this slow-burning confrontation. And yet, amidst the tension, I found clarity. I had tools Karen didn't even imagine. Years of experience had taught me patience, observation, and strategy. I knew when to confront, when to wait, and when silence alone could hold more power than any argument. That night, as Emily slept, I stayed on the porch a while longer. The fading light cast long shadows across the yard, and I thought about the nature of authority. It isn't given by a badge or a clipboard. It's earned through courage, presence, and the willingness to stand firm when others try to overstep. Karen would test me, she always would, but I also knew she hadn't yet seen the full measure of what I was capable of. And that, I realized, was the slow burn of the story we were living. Every action, every word, every tense encounter was leading somewhere, toward a moment of reckoning she couldn't yet comprehend. The stakes weren't just compliance. They were trust, protection, and the unspoken understanding that some boundaries were sacred. The night deepened, leaving only the soft hum of distant traffic and the occasional creak of the gate. I let my eyes scan the horizon, alert and unwavering. Karen might return, and when she did, the next act of this silent war would unfold. But for now, the lesson was simple and yet profound. Sometimes patience, courage, and presence are enough to hold back the storm, even when it feels like the world is closing in. The next morning, the air had a brittle edge, like the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. Emily wheeled herself to the porch as usual, her small hands gripping the edges of her blanket. Her face, usually bright and curious, bore a subtle weariness. Even at her age, she could sense when the calm of home was an illusion. I poured coffee, inhaling its warmth and trying to steady my thoughts. Something told me this wasn't over. Karen had a persistence that bordered on obsession. I stepped outside, boots crunching softly on the gravel, surveying the street. Everything seemed normal, the neighbors going about their routines, distant laughter, a mail carrier humming while delivering letters, yet beneath that ordinary veneer I felt the tension like static electricity. Then I saw it, a white envelope unmarked, tucked under the mailbox flag. I picked it up, noting the crisp edges and the lack of return address. My heart tightened slightly. This was the HOA, this was Karen. Inside, a typed letter detailed new violations, vague but intentionally threatening. A fence here, a vehicle there, each word meticulously chosen to convey authority without substance. My pulse quickened, not from fear but from the familiar stirrings of challenge. Karen thought she could intimidate me. She didn't yet understand that intimidation was my ally when wielded correctly, and her reach was limited to the boundaries of my property. Emily glanced at me, sensing my unease. "Daddy, is she coming back?" she asked quietly, her voice small against the gentle morning hum. I knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "For now, we ignore her," I said calmly, though every instinct in me screamed to anticipate her next move. "But we stay alert, always." Her nod was faint but resolute, the kind of trust only a child could give without hesitation. The day passed slowly. The faint hum of normalcy contrasted sharply with the underlying tension. Each sound, the distant barking of dogs, the squeak of a swing, the muffled laughter from across the street became part of a subconscious rhythm of vigilance. By mid-afternoon, I noticed a subtle shift. Shadows seemed longer, angles sharper, the neighborhood quieter in a way that suggested surveillance. Someone had been watching, someone had been waiting. I checked the yard meticulously, every inch, every corner. The gate latch was in the same slightly shifted position I'd noticed before, nothing forced, nothing broken, but deliberate. Someone had been here, someone had tested the boundary. My heart sank for a fraction of a second before steadying. Karen wasn't just a nuisance anymore. She had crossed a line, though unknowingly, and the realization brought both anger and clarity. Emily rolled herself closer, sensing my tension. "Daddy, what if she tries again?" Her words were soft, but they carried weight. I knelt, letting my eyes meet hers. "Then we handle it like we always do, calmly, firmly, without giving her the satisfaction of fear. We protect what's ours, and we never let her take that from us." Her small hand rested in mine, grounding me, reminding me why I had to remain vigilant. By late afternoon, Karen appeared again. This time, she didn't announce herself. She stood near the edge of the sidewalk, clipboard tucked under her arm, watching the property with a keen eye. Her posture was tense, body rigid. It was a different kind of approach, no shouting, no theatrics, just observation. This was her testing phase, her reconnaissance. She wanted to see how I'd react, how my daughter would respond, how far she could push before consequences became tangible. I didn't acknowledge her at first, letting her study the property, the house, and us. Every step I took was deliberate, every movement was measured. I could see the micro-expressions in her face, the slight flicker of irritation, the quick assessment of risk, the frustration of not finding leverage. Emily stayed close to the porch, quiet and observant. Together, we were calm, steady, unshaken by the tension in the air. Finally, Karen made a move. She stepped onto the driveway, clipboard raised slightly as if preparing to assert her authority. I didn't flinch, I waited, letting the moment stretch. The silence was heavy, almost tangible, broken only by the soft creak of the gate in the breeze. Emily watched, her small body taut with attention. I could feel her anxiety, her trust, and her curiosity mingling in equal measure. You can't ignore these violations," Karen said, voice tight, controlled. She was no longer shouting, instead her tone carried the subtle menace of someone testing boundaries. "I have every right to enforce the rules." "And I have every right to protect my home and my daughter," I interrupted, voice low but firm, resonating with authority. "This ends now, you either leave peacefully or we escalate through proper channels. Your choice, Karen, but understand this, crossing the line has consequences." Her expression faltered, eyes flicking toward Emily. She saw the child, the trust, the calm, and it threw her off balance. She hadn't anticipated this aspect, she had underestimated the human element, the resilience that isn't visible on a rule sheet. Karen hesitated, body stiffening, then muttered something about reports and compliance before retreating to her car. Her movements were hurried, almost clumsy. The subtle cracks in her composure were becoming more visible with each encounter. As the tires crunched over gravel and she disappeared from view, the street fell silent once more. Emily exhaled softly, relief washing over her face. I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "We held our ground today," I said quietly, "and tomorrow we'll be ready too." That evening I walked the perimeter of the property again, flashlight in hand, scanning for anything unusual. The shadows lengthened, stretching across the yard like silent fingers probing for weakness. The knowledge that Karen might attempt something subtler, something less overt but equally invasive, sharpened my senses. Every creak, every rustle of leaves, every flicker of light became part of an awareness I couldn't afford to lose. And in that quiet, I reflected on the deeper lesson hidden in the chaos. Authority isn't about shouting or wielding a clipboard, it's about presence, about measured response, about understanding the stakes without letting emotion dictate action. Karen had authority on paper, but it was empty. I had presence, experience, and resolve. That was real authority, and it was what would protect my daughter and our home. By the time darkness fully fell, the neighborhood returned to its false calm. The only sounds were distant cars and the occasional rustle of leaves. Emily had gone inside, ready for bed, her small trust in me reaffirmed. I stayed on the porch for a while, letting the night air wash over me, feeling the weight of vigilance and the clarity it brought. The storm wasn't over. Karen would test us again, but we were prepared, calm, aware, and resolute. The night held its quiet, but beneath it I felt the pulse of inevitability. Conflict was coming, subtle and deliberate. But I knew, as I always had, that patience, observation, and measured response could turn the tide. And when the next confrontation came, we would not just survive it. We would emerge stronger, grounded in the simple truth that some boundaries are sacred, and some authority, no matter how loudly proclaimed, is meaningless in the face of presence and resolve. It was early morning again when I realized just how calculated Karen had become. The sun hadn't fully climbed above the rooftops, and the air had that faint metallic scent that comes just before a storm, or maybe just before confrontation. Emily was already at the porch, blanket tucked around her lap, hands folded tightly. I could see the weight of anticipation in her small frame. Even at her age, she sensed the tension, the quiet danger that lingered like a shadow across our street. I stepped outside, boots brushing against the dew-laden grass, scanning the surroundings. The street appeared calm, birds chirped faintly, a neighbor's dog barked distantly, but I knew better. The silence of the neighborhood no longer meant peace, it was the calm before escalation. And sure enough, a car turned onto the street slowly, deliberately. Karen, her usual flashy red jacket replaced by a neutral coat, clipboard still in hand, her posture stiff and measured. She was changing tactics. No theatrics, no shouts, just observation, calculated waiting. I let the moment stretch. Emily's hands gripped the blanket tighter. I crouched beside her, voice low, firm. We watch, we wait, nothing provokes her, we don't give her the reaction she wants. Her nod was faint but resolute. The trust she placed in me was tangible, grounding me even as the tension thickened. Karen parked at the end of the driveway, pretending to tie a shoe or inspect something minor, but her eyes never left us. She was studying timing, behavior patterns, and I realized with a sinking certainty that she had learned from previous encounters. She would escalate differently this time, subtly, strategically. This wasn't about a clipboard or rules anymore, it was about testing boundaries and finding cracks. Minutes passed. I remained calm, boots planted firmly, eyes scanning, heartbeat steady despite the awareness that this confrontation could go further than any before. Emily remained close, small, and vigilant. Karen finally straightened, clipboard in hand, approaching slowly, deliberately like a predator assessing a challenge. You didn't respond to the notice," she said, voice tight, controlled. "You can't just ignore." I interrupted, calm but unmistakably firm. I responded, "I ignored it because it was baseless, and I protect what's mine, Emily's home, my home, that doesn't require your approval, Karen." Her lips pressed into a thin line. She glanced around, checking for witnesses, allies, or even justification. None existed, and for the first time I noticed the hesitation flicker across her face, microseconds but telling. She had miscalculated. I wasn't reactive, I wasn't intimidated, I was steady, observant, and ready. Emily's small voice broke the tension. "Daddy, she's right there." She pointed subtly. I nodded. "I see her. Stay calm, watch, don't react, trust me." Karen's next words were sharp, measured, designed to unsettle. "If you don't comply, I can issue more citations, escalate to legal action, even involve authorities." Her eyes flicked to Emily again, a faint, unsteady glance, and I realized she had no concept of the real stakes. This wasn't a simple HOA dispute. This was about presence, awareness, and resolve. Authority on paper meant nothing in the face of grounded action. I stepped forward, boots brushing the wooden porch. "You can try," I said evenly, letting the words hang in the air. "But understand this, you don't know who you're dealing with. You see a homeowner, you see a family, but what you don't see is vigilance, strategy, and the consequences of overstepping boundaries." For a moment she faltered, jaw tightening. Her composure cracked just slightly, and I realized she was recalculating, measuring risk against ego, weighing how far she could push before she reached a line she didn't understand. She had become obsessed with testing me, yet she had not yet understood that patience and presence were as much a weapon as any law or regulation. Suddenly, she changed approach again. You can't just ignore me." Her voice rose, tight with frustration, but it lacked the theatricality of past confrontations. It was subtle now, a mental push rather than a physical or verbal one. I let the silence grow, letting it press against her, letting her realize the futility of intimidation when faced with calm, deliberate confidence. Emily shifted slightly, rolling closer to my side. I placed a hand on hers, grounding her, reaffirming that we were together, safe and unshaken. Karen hesitated, eyes darting, posture rigid. Then she muttered almost to herself, "This isn't over." Her words were soft but carried weight, the implicit acknowledgement that she hadn't won. She stepped back toward her car, clipboard clutched like armor, her movements hurried but careful. The soft crunch of tires over gravel echoed down the street as she disappeared from view. I exhaled slowly, tension leaving my shoulders fractionally. Emily's small fingers squeezed mine. "We did it, Daddy," she whispered. I nodded, brushing her hair gently. "For now we did, but she'll return, and when she does, we'll be ready again." That evening I walked the perimeter, flashlight in hand, scanning for anomalies. Shadows stretched long and every rustle of leaves sounded amplified in the quiet of dusk. The gate, the yard, the property, it was all under observation and I could feel it. Karen's obsession was a force, but it was limited by ignorance. She didn't know the rules of engagement here. She didn't understand that patience, calm observation, and calculated presence could hold a storm at bay. I reflected quietly on the subtle lessons hidden in these encounters. True authority is earned, not claimed. Courage isn't shown in shouting or waving a clipboard. Strength isn't always obvious. And sometimes the greatest victories aren't the dramatic ones, but the quiet triumphs, moments when patience and awareness prevent escalation, protect the vulnerable, and maintain dignity. By nightfall, the neighborhood returned to its deceptive calm. Emily had gone inside, her small trust in me intact, her resilience strengthened by our calm response. I remained on the porch for a while, scanning the street, listening for anything unusual, letting the night air ground me. The conflict was far from over, but every encounter sharpened our awareness, strengthened our resolve, and reaffirmed the simple truth. Some boundaries are sacred, and some authority, no matter how loudly proclaimed, is meaningless against presence, patience, and determination. The first 5 confrontations had taught me that Karen would escalate, shift tactics, and attempt subtle manipulations. But I had also learned the power of calm, presence, and unwavering resolve. And as the darkness settled over our quiet street, I knew that the next encounter would test all of that and more. The morning arrived heavy with expectation. The sky was a pale gray, the kind of dull light that makes shadows sharper, edges more pronounced, and every sound feel louder. Emily was already awake, positioned at the porch, her hands folded over her blanket as if holding herself together. She didn't speak, just watched the street with quiet awareness. Her trust in me was unwavering, but I could see the anxiety she didn't voice. I stepped outside, boots scuffing softly against the damp concrete, scanning the street. Everything appeared calm. The neighbors were inside their homes, the distant hum of traffic muted by the rows of houses, yet I knew better. Karen was patient in her obsession. She waited, studied, and planned. This wasn't about rules anymore. This was about testing resolve, probing for weakness, and seeing how far she could push. Minutes later, she appeared again. This time, her approach was different. No clipboard raised like armor, no obvious theatrics. She moved with calculated precision, stepping along the sidewalk, eyes fixed on the property, scanning details as if hunting for a flaw. She had learned from previous encounters. She understood now that intimidation wasn't working, so she was changing tactics, subtle, psychological, persistent. I remained still, boots planted firmly, every muscle poised but relaxed. Emily rolled slightly closer to me, sensing the tension, her small presence grounding me in reality. I spoke softly, low enough for only her to hear. Watch, stay calm, and trust. Nothing provokes her. She reacts to reaction, not presence. She nodded, her eyes wide but focused. Karen stopped at the edge of the driveway, almost casually, yet every movement was deliberate. Her eyes flicked to Emily, and I could see the hesitation there, microseconds of doubt she didn't know how to process. She was realizing slowly that we weren't ordinary, that her normal methods of pressure, authority, rules, intimidation were failing. "You've ignored the notices," she said, voice tight, controlled. "You can't just ignore baseless threats," I interrupted, calm, authoritative. "Yes, I protect my home, I protect my family. That's not optional, and you don't get to dictate it." Her jaw tightened. She had no allies here, no witnesses, no justification beyond her obsession with control. And I realized the subtle genius of her escalation. She wasn't confronting me directly. She was probing, trying to create stress, uncertainty, and small cracks in our composure. But each encounter had only strengthened our awareness, our calm, our confidence. Emily shifted slightly, her small hand brushing mine. "Daddy, she's right there," she whispered. I nodded, gripping her hand gently. "I see her. Stay calm, watch, trust me." Karen's expression hardened, and for the first time I saw real frustration cross her face. The subtle cracks in her armor widened. Her eyes darted around, searching for a strategy, a point of leverage, anything to regain control. She didn't find it because we weren't reactive. We weren't predictable. Then she stepped onto the driveway, voice low but firm. "You can't just ignore me." Her words were an assertion, but the weight behind them lacked confidence. She was pushing, testing, probing, but without the certainty she needed to dominate. I exhaled slowly, letting the silence stretch between us. The tension hung like fog, thick and almost suffocating. Emily remained calm, her trust palpable, reinforcing my resolve. "You can try," I said evenly. "But understand this, you've underestimated what's here. You don't know the consequences of overstepping boundaries." Her hesitation was brief but telling. She glanced at Emily, realizing she couldn't intimidate or frighten her. And for a fraction of a second, I saw doubt, the first real doubt. Karen had pushed her limits, tested our patience, and had nothing to show for it. Then, almost imperceptibly, she muttered, "This isn't over," and retreated. But unlike previous times, her departure was deliberate, cautious, measured. She wasn't retreating out of pride, it was strategy. She was already planning the next move, recalculating what she could do differently. I exhaled, tension releasing slowly. Emily rolled closer to the porch, relief evident in her expression. "We did fine," I said softly, "but she'll be back, and when she does, we'll be ready again." The afternoon passed quietly, deceptively calm. I took the opportunity to reinforce boundaries around the property, checking gates, reinforcing locks, surveying the yard. Every creak, every rustle of leaves, every shadow became part of my awareness. Karen's psychological probing had made one thing clear: subtle escalation was her strategy now. She wouldn't shout or gesture dramatically. She would wait, she would observe, she would test. By evening, I was back on the porch, flashlight in hand, scanning the perimeter. Shadows stretched long and unfamiliar. The gate creaked faintly in the wind, a sound amplified by my alertness. Each leaf rustle, each distant sound became part of the tension, as though the neighborhood itself had become a stage for this silent war. I reflected quietly on what these encounters had taught me. Real authority is earned, not claimed. Real power isn't in intimidation or citations, it's in patience, observation, and the unwavering protection of what matters. Karen may have thought she was in control. She may have believed that persistence and minor provocations would wear us down. But she underestimated presence, vigilance, and the quiet strength that comes from standing firm when it counts. Emily went inside, ready for bed, her small trust in me intact. I remained outside a while longer, letting the night air ground me, scanning for movement, aware that the next escalation would come. Karen's obsession was relentless, her tactics subtle, and yet the lessons we had learned prepared us for the confrontation yet to unfold. As darkness settled over the neighborhood, I understood the delicate balance we were maintaining: patience against provocation, calm against agitation, awareness against manipulation. The storm wasn't over. Karen's presence lingered like a shadow at the edge of perception, waiting for the smallest sign of weakness. But we were ready, prepared, steady. And when the next encounter came, the true measure of resolve and protection would be revealed. The day began with an uneasy quiet. The air carried a faint chill and the sky was a steel gray, casting long shadows across the yard. Emily rolled herself onto the porch, blanket tucked tightly, hands gripping the edges as if they could hold back the unease. Even she could feel it, that something was coming. I could feel it too, in the way the wind seemed sharper, the way distant sounds carried farther. Karen was planning her next move, and this time I sensed it would be bolder. I stepped outside, boots scuffing against the gravel, scanning the street with alert eyes. The neighbors were largely absent, leaving the cul-de-sac eerily quiet. Every movement, every rustle of leaves, every distant car engine made me pause, assess, calculate. There, a white sedan rounding the corner slowly. Karen, no theatrics this time, no shouting, no clipboard flailing, just cold, calculated observation. I took a deep breath, keeping my movements slow and deliberate, grounding myself in presence rather than reaction. Emily rolled a fraction closer to me and I whispered, "Watch, stay calm, trust me." Her small nod gave me strength. This was no longer a battle of paper citations or minor rules. This was psychological warfare, a test of vigilance, patience, and control. Karen stepped onto the sidewalk, her posture rigid, eyes darting around, trying to find leverage. It was subtle now, her methods had evolved. She wasn't looking for confrontation through shouting or intimidation anymore. She was probing for weakness, for any crack in our composure. And I understood with a cold certainty that today she intended to escalate further than she ever had before. You can't just ignore the rules," she said, voice tight, almost controlled, her words designed to unsettle, to assert dominance without theatrics. Her eyes flicked toward Emily, and I could see the micro-expression of hesitation, an acknowledgement that she had crossed boundaries she didn't fully comprehend. I stepped forward slightly, boots brushing the porch boards. My voice was calm, low, and deliberate. "I'm not ignoring anything, I'm protecting what's mine, my home, my daughter. You have no authority here, not over us, not today." Her jaw tightened, frustration flickering across her face. She shifted slightly, glancing around for witnesses or allies, finding none, and in that moment I realized the magnitude of her miscalculation. She believed her persistence would provoke fear, but presence is more powerful than intimidation and calm more effective than aggression. Emily's small voice broke the silence. "Daddy, she's still there." She watched with wide eyes, hands clutching the blanket. I crouched beside her, brushing her hair gently. "I know," I whispered. "And we're steady, nothing changes that." Karen's next words came sharper, more deliberate. "I can issue fines, escalate to legal action, involve authorities." Her gaze flicked toward Emily again, and for the first time her voice wavered slightly. She hadn't anticipated this. She couldn't intimidate a child, and the calm authority she faced was unwavering. I let the silence stretch, letting the weight of presence press against her. "Try all you want," I said evenly. "But know this, every action has consequences. You don't know what's behind this home, you don't know who you're dealing with, and you never will until it's too late for you to walk away." Her hesitation was brief but telling. Karen's movements became jittery, subtle shifts betraying internal calculation. She was recalculating, assessing risk, testing her options. But for every step she considered, I could see the widening cracks of doubt in her expression. She was realizing, painfully, that she was outmatched in ways she had never expected. Then in a sudden shift, she made a move that startled me. She stepped closer to the driveway, voice dropping low. You can't control everything." Her words were sharp, almost desperate, but they lacked the certainty she needed. She was trying to dominate through fear, but fear could not be conjured in the presence of calm authority. I exhaled slowly, letting the silence press back. Emily remained still beside me, eyes wide, trust absolute. I knew Karen's obsession had reached a tipping point. She wasn't just challenging rules now, she was challenging control, testing limits, escalating in a way that could no longer be ignored. Suddenly her phone rang. She glanced at it, hesitation flickering across her face. Her focus was broken, her carefully constructed bravado disrupted. She muttered under her breath and retreated toward her car, muttering, "This isn't over." The soft crunch of tires over gravel echoed down the street, leaving the neighborhood in tense silence once more. I exhaled fully, tension easing slightly. Emily rolled back, her small frame relaxing fractionally. "We did it," she whispered. I smiled, brushing her hair back gently. "For now, yes, but she'll return, and when she does, we'll be ready, always." That night I walked the perimeter again, flashlight in hand, scanning every corner, every shadow. The subtle shift in Karen's tactics made the stakes unmistakable. She would escalate, test, probe, and try to find leverage. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the faint creak of the gate, the distant hum of traffic was amplified in my awareness. I thought about the deeper truths hidden in these encounters. Real authority is earned through presence, patience, and vigilance. Courage isn't loud, it's measured, strength is silent. And sometimes, the most profound victories are those that don't announce themselves, moments when calm and observation prevent escalation and protect what matters most. Emily went inside, ready for bed, trust in me intact. I stayed outside, letting the night air clear my thoughts, aware that the next encounter would demand every ounce of strategy, calm, and presence. Karen's obsession, subtle escalation, and persistence were a shadow that lingered. But I was ready, grounded in the knowledge that some boundaries are sacred, and that authority, no matter how loudly proclaimed, is meaningless without understanding the consequences of crossing them. By the time darkness fully enveloped the street, the tension was palpable but contained. I reflected quietly on the lessons of patience, vigilance, and measured response. The storm was far from over. Karen would return, but when she did, the confrontation would be inevitable, and we would be ready. It was just before sunset when I sensed it, the subtle shift in the air that meant Karen was back. Emily, as always, had already positioned herself on the porch, small hands clutching her blanket, eyes wide and alert. She could feel it too, the tension that lingered like a storm cloud above our street. I took a deep breath, letting the fading light sharpen my focus, grounding myself in the calm that had protected us through every encounter so far. Karen's car appeared at the end of the street, moving slowly, deliberately, tires crunching softly over gravel. No gestures, no clipboard, no theatrics, just observation. But this time her approach felt different. There was an urgency, a determination that had been building quietly, and now it was tangible. She was no longer testing, she was acting. I stepped onto the porch, boots firm, every movement deliberate. Emily rolled closer, whispering, "Daddy, she's here." I nodded, brushing her hair gently, voice low and steady. "I know, we stay calm, we watch, we wait, trust me." Her small nod was unwavering, the kind of trust that only comes from years of reassurance and steady presence. Karen stopped at the edge of the driveway. Her eyes darted between the house, the yard, and us. Every micro-expression betrayed tension, frustration, and a flicker of uncertainty. She had underestimated the stakes, underestimated who she was dealing with, and I knew she would make a mistake today because obsession can cloud judgment, and she was teetering on that edge. You can't just ignore me." Her voice, though low, carried authority she tried desperately to enforce, but it lacked conviction. She had no real power here. Authority, she had learned, was empty without presence, and we had presence in abundance. I stepped forward slightly, voice calm, measured, resonant with the weight of certainty. "I protect my home, I protect my daughter. You have no power here, Karen, none. And today you're about to learn that some boundaries are sacred, and some actions have consequences you cannot ignore." For a moment she froze, uncertainty flashing across her face. Then she made a move that revealed her true recklessness. She stepped closer, hand raised slightly as if to assert control, to intimidate, to push. Her focus flicked briefly toward Emily. My heart tightened, adrenaline spiking. The protective instinct that had carried me through months of subtle escalation now demanded action. I moved before she could act, voice sharp and commanding. "Step back, now." My hand rested lightly on the door frame, ready, vigilant, calm. The tension was almost unbearable. Emily's small hand pressed against mine, her trust anchoring me as the confrontation reached its peak. Karen faltered, her eyes widened, the realization of miscalculation dawning. She didn't know the full measure of who she was confronting. She didn't know that beneath this ordinary home and quiet demeanor lay years of experience, vigilance, and authority in its most tangible form, and that realization froze her. You don't understand," she whispered, almost pleading. I'm enforcing rules." "Rules mean nothing when they endanger what matters most," I said evenly, letting the weight of calm authority press against her. "You've crossed a line, Karen. You don't intimidate us, you don't scare us, and any further action will have consequences you cannot control." For a moment, silence hung over the street like a living thing. Emily remained close, trusting, steady, her small presence a reminder of what mattered most. Karen's eyes flicked to her, then back to me, hesitation cracking the composure she had tried to maintain for months. And then it happened, a subtle, almost imperceptible step backward, her shoulders slumping. She realized finally that she had lost control, her obsession, her testing, her manipulations, all meaningless against presence, vigilance, and calm authority. She muttered something under her breath about "this isn't over," but made no further move. Instead, she turned and walked toward her car, each step deliberate but subdued, until the soft crunch of tires over gravel carried her from view once more. I exhaled, tension leaving my body slowly. Emily's small fingers squeezed mine. We won," she whispered. I knelt, brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead. Yes, Emily, for now, but remember what we've learned. Calm, vigilance, patience, these are more powerful than fear, always. That night, I walked the perimeter of the yard one final time, flashlight in hand, scanning shadows, listening for the faintest rustle of movement. The gate creaked softly in the wind, leaves whispered in the darkness, and the neighborhood held its breath. Every encounter, every escalation had prepared us for this moment. And tonight, the lesson was clear: boundaries are sacred, presence is authority, and courage, measured and steady, always prevails over recklessness. I reflected quietly, thinking about the months of tension, observation, and subtle psychological warfare. Karen had underestimated us. She had believed that authority could be claimed with words, intimidation, and persistence. But she had failed to recognize the real power of vigilance, of calm presence, and of unwavering protection for those we love. Emily went inside, her small trust in me intact, her resilience strengthened by every encounter. I remained on the porch a while longer, letting the cool night air ground me, aware that the neighborhood had returned to a deceptive calm. Karen's obsession would linger somewhere in the distance, but it would no longer have sway over us. As darkness fully settled, I thought about the quiet truths hidden in the chaos of these confrontations. True authority is not claimed on paper. Real power is measured in calm, in vigilance, in the courage to protect what matters most without yielding to fear. And sometimes the greatest victories are the quiet ones, moments when patience and awareness prevent harm, maintain dignity, and safeguard trust. The storm had passed, not with drama or loud confrontation, but with the subtle triumph of presence, preparation, and unwavering resolve. Karen would no longer test the boundaries she could never truly understand. And in that quiet, I felt the satisfaction of a long, tense battle finally resolved, not through aggression, but through steadfastness, vigilance, and the protection of family. I glanced at Emily, peacefully asleep inside, her small frame a reminder of why every step, every decision, every moment of calm vigilance had mattered. And I knew that this was more than a victory over one persistent neighbor. It was a testament to the power of patience, presence, and unwavering resolve in the face of relentless challenge. The night carried its quiet, the air stilled, the shadows long. And in that silence, I allowed myself the rare luxury of calm, knowing that we had survived the storm, learned its lessons, and emerged stronger. Boundaries were intact, trust was preserved, and the most important authority, the protection of home and family, remained ours. Every HOA has a story on HOA headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.